In Month in Siena is the new book by Hisham Matar, which should have been released on the opening day of the festival. Tonight we'll be talking about it with the author and with the art critic Fulvio Dell'Agnese. The book shows the love for our country and consideration for Italian art. Art which can be an element of comfort. The works of art of medieval Sienese painting can provide comfort at difficult times and are also very relevant to the events we are living through. Hello to everyone. Thank you, Hisham Matar, for being with us today to talk about your latest novel, this one, A Month in Siena, un punto di approdo in Italian, that was published in Italy by Einaudi some months ago. This book is in line with Matar's previous novels in two ways. First of all, because it has a wonderful style, and secondly, because it is clear that it was written almost out of necessity, that it has a profound motivation, just like the rest of his books. This book focuses on Italy, and it focuses on Siena in particular. Siena is the landing place reached by Matar as a man and as a writer. Matar spent a few weeks, a little bit more than 1 month in Siena, and this is described in the book. A book which talks a lot about the city. It talks about its heart and history in a very profound way, which I wouldn't have expected, to be honest, from Matar, despite the fact that he is a great writer. So the book talks about the 14th century Sienese art, which in the past Matar had already met in London at the National Gallery. And this is also described in the wonderful first pages of the book. And the book also focuses on some Sienese authors, such as Duccio da Boninsegna. For example, this is one of his works. It's called The Healing of the Man Born Blind by Duccio, which is part of the altarpiece Maestà. These paintings and their characters are described by Matar as follows, and I read from the book. They stood alone, neither Byzantine nor of the Renaissance, an anomaly between chapters, like the orchestra tuning its strings in the interval. To Matar, these are the Sienese artists of the late 13th, early 14th century. I find that this idea of the orchestra tuning its strings in the interval, which could well be the interval between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, is one of the most precise, though vague, descriptions of Sienese artists which I've ever read. Talking about this painting, Matar also underlines, and I quote, the playful and brightly crisp activity in the upper half of the picture, where a hopscotch of arches and windows, peering into empty spaces, stare openly. In the narration, they almost become as important as the characters. In the end, it seems to me that what best summarizes Duccio da Boninsegna and the other Sinese artists mentioned in the book is the definition of this specific painting, the healing of the man born blind as a space of doubt. So, my first question will focus on this idea of doubt. It is quite interesting that at a time of your life when, as you also write in the book, you were looking for a landing place, let's say a new starting point to put an end to a previous phase of your life, you found this landing place in a city which artistically you define as a space of doubt.
Definisce al tempo stesso come uno spazio di dubbio. Come si conciliano?
How is that possible?
Well, first of all, hello to everyone, and thank you so much for the deeply heartening and humbling comments about my work, and for the attention that you have paid us. That means a lot to me. And just welcome to everybody present, and how much I wish to be there. And part of my wishing to be there is obvious, but part of it maybe isn't so obvious. Part of the reason I wish to be there is connected to your question about the way that we engage with art. Part of the reason I wish to be there is to do with that mysterious thing that happens when we are in attendance of one another. The things that are the very subtle and infinite things that are communicated between individuals, but also between you and I and whoever is listening, which in this context is very difficult, of course. I think one of the things, I have to, of course, start with, the basic statement that I have no idea what art is. I have a set of propositions about it. And one of them, I think, is to do with the fact that one of the things that art does is that it creates and offers to us a very, very concentrated space, a space of concentrated human activity, of intelligence, the emotional life, psychological vitality, and oftentimes opposing propositions, like the painting that you mentioned, a painting that on the face of it is an illustration of Christ's miracle powers of healing. But then when you look at it closely, you think that it's actually a painting that is thinking about what it might be to see and what it might be not to see. What are the social consequences of being seen? Because if you're blind, and I have a very good friend of mine who was born blind. He has never seen. And I have always admired his easy physical way of being. He's not self-conscious like I am. The way he walks, the way he sits, the way he looks up when he's talking. So I think one of the things that happens when you see, when you are initiated into the world of seeing and being seen, is that you're also initiated into the social consequences of it. That you will be judging and you will be judged. And I think that painting is thinking about this question of being exposed and not being exposed, what those things mean, as well as being an illustration of Christ's miracle power. So I think a painting becomes a landing place in that sense too, in the sense that it's where we go and deposit our curiosities, our enthusiasms. And a great painting, I think, just like a great book or a great piece of music, a great symphony, can curate your curiosities. In other words, that within it, if you gain purchase, I mean the term in the way that rock climbers use it. When you gain purchase on the rock, if you gain purchase on a painting, for a moment you feel much smarter than you are normally. At least in my case, you feel just far more intelligent and and you feel far deeper. Of course, that doesn't happen all the time, but and I think that has something to do with the function of this concentrated space that I'm describing, of what a piece of work might be.
Spazio concentrato,
to some extent, Siena as a city can also be a concentrated space. A city with its walls, which you explore in a very specific way. And maybe we'll talk about it later on.
Mr. Matar, lei nel libro,
in the book,
a più riprese, soprattutto nella prima
at different
parte,
times, and especially in the first part of the book, you explain that you approached the Siena, let's say, gradually, over the time, after seeing the works of Sienese artists in London and elsewhere, but also with deep respect. For example, at some point you were even thinking about reaching the city on foot, with what you define as a sort of reticence. In a very funny passage, if I may say so, you wrote, and I quote, "Over the last 25 years, the more fascinated I became with Sienese art, the more Siena began to occupy the sort of uneasy reverence the devout might feel towards Mecca or Rome or Jerusalem." So, my question is, were you ever afraid of being disappointed when you finally arrived in the city, which had so much aroused your curiosity from a cultural point of view?
Da una minima paura di andare incontro a una delusione.
Were you ever afraid of not finding in Siena what you expected?
Quello che lei si era mentalmente prefigurato, ovvero
and here I would like to quote another passage of the book, which actually doesn't talk about Siena, but about a similar situation. Were you ever afraid that the enchantment would break?
Mi riferisco a delle altre pagine in cui lei parla di un'esperienza avuta.
Here I'm talking about some other pages in the book where you write about an experience you had with your wife in another Italian art city, in Rome, when near Sant'Andrea al Quirilale, you were so much immersed in the context that you feared that a small movement by your wife, lying down on the grass, would make the magic fade.
Per un momento temere che quella magia svanisse,
And I quote here,
ma
but
poi
then
si
she
estese di
lay back
nuovo
down
e il suo
again,
corpo ha
and her
ritrovato gli
body
stessi
found
spazi
the
prima,
exact places
cosa
where it had
che
been
in quel
before.
momento mi
And
parve
at that
un
moment,
miracolo.
this seemed
Ecco,
miraculous.
domanda.
So I will
C'è
repeat the
stato
question.
un momento
Were
in
you
cui
ever
puoi immaginare
afraid
che il
that the
miracolo
miracle wouldn't
arrivato a
happen
Siena potesse
once you arrived in
non
Siena?
manifestarsi quale se l'era prefigurato?
You know that passage that you allude to the one in Rome with my wife Diana. It's part of the book for me was quite important. It was like the central bolt, you know, that holds the book together for me. And it's a paradox because most of it doesn't take place in Siena. But what it does is that it layers several moments. The moment of being in Siena, which then reminds me of a moment we are in Rome, which in itself has in it memories of a moment before it in Libya. And I'm just always, I mean, as a person, but as a writer, I am fascinated by this quality of human consciousness, the way that we are all in our modest, even our most modest moments in our day, containing different moments from the past, the present, maybe even anticipations of the future. But no, you know, I have to say, I went to Siena. And I'm very grateful to Siena for many reasons. I mean, not only because I feel that it had lent itself to me, you know, it became available to me for whatever reason, whatever the accident of time or the way that she and I met. Siena was a very available and generous place to my mind. I'm grateful for that, but I'm also grateful because the trip um, renewed my confidence and pleasure. You know, I'm I work quite hard. I'm not somebody who um, I do take my pleasure seriously, but not maybe as seriously as I should. And Siena proved to me that if I follow my nose, usually interesting things happen. Not always, but usually. And I went to Siena. I didn't know why. I had no plan to write a book. I actually went, as I write in the book, I went to not work. I went to take a break for a month and do something that I almost never do, which is stop working. And I don't understand what a vacation is. And this is, you see, I have many problems. This is one of them. I don't know what a vacation is. I don't know what to do in a vacation. I don't know what, you know, I love the sea and I love nature and I love good food but I'm always working a little bit on the side, even if I'm doing very, very little. So this was a new, and I found that when I stopped, that I was not only responding and taking seriously my pleasure, which is to look at these paintings for no purpose, no declared purpose. I wasn't going to write about it or anything in my mind. But it also attended to this complicated moment that I was at, where by you know, I'd reached the end of the road of searching for the whereabouts of my father, who was kidnapped and made to disappear, and I had spent the majority of my life looking for him. Um, and the moment I go to Siena is the moment when my search for him had been exhausted and I still had no answers. And I had to somehow consider the possibility that I would have to live the rest of my life not knowing how, when, where my father died, where his remains might be. Uh, and it's a particular burden, this, you know, it's a particular burden that if you are like me and you're interested in life and interested in the light and interested continuing to sing, then you have to find a way to accommodate this burden in a way that is authentic, that you don't cheat yourself out of it, but in a way also that doesn't colonize your life. And these questions were shifting in my head. And so the book is, if you like, the book is written against those questions. Those questions are rarely mentioned in the book. But that is the atmosphere. That is the intensity with which I go to the paintings, and I go to Siena, and I go to its streets, until it sort of becomes a kind of allegorical space for me. There's a wonderful writer. I'm sure he's translated very well in Italian. A wonderful writer from the Sudan called Tayyib Saleh. He didn't write much, but he wrote a fabulous novel. The English title, or the title in English, is because he wrote it in Arabic, but it's translated very well into English, and I think into Italian too. It's called Season of Migration to the North. Wonderful novel. And he had this lovely idea about what an allegory is. He thought of an allegory as like a shimmering object at the bottom of the sea. You only see its reflections, but you don't know what it is. It could be a ring, it could be a coin, a piece of glass. And that allegories should always be like that. Their source is mysterious, but the reflections are eloquent, And for me, Siena was that. So for me, it's a mystery why this place. I responded to it this way, but I'm filled with continue to be filled with curiosity towards it and gratitude.
Lei ha appena usato un'espressione.
You have just used an expression, well, maybe you actually didn't say that, but you have just mentioned the idea of going adrift, as in letting yourself flow in the city, which is perfectly in line with the structure of the book. As in, it is quite clear that in exploring the city, you are like entering a living organism, as you write in the book. In other words, you don't behave like a tourist, an educated tourist who wants to see a new place with the utmost attention.
Meticolosamente un contesto che non gli appartiene.
Rather, you have a deeper attitude in your exploration, and I will read another passage from the book. And it was as though Diana and I had entered a space that was ours, one in which we had all along been anticipated, and where we suspected, once we left, we would continue to be expected. Isn't this at least one definition of happiness, I thought, to be anticipated? So it's a sort of mutual anticipation. On the one end, anticipation by the city with respect to you and your wife, who was with you on the first days. And on the other, there's anticipation by Matar, who wants to be increasingly permeated by the atmosphere of the city.
Al punto che in un altro bellissimo passaggio,
in another very beautiful passage, You write, and now I will use my own words. You write that you wanted to be increasingly sharpened against the city, adapting to the city, until you would be worthy enough to go and see the works of art that we mentioned
le
before.
opere d'arte di cui parlavamo prima, perché anche con queste,
Because reading a book, it seems that once you arrived in the city, you also had a sort of reticence towards them. So you approached the city slowly, and you approached the museums and the churches where you could find these spaces of concentration of images even more slowly.
Di cui accennava in precedenza. Ci vuole dire qualche
Can you
cosa
tell us something more about this further reticence when inside the city you had to take the last step to go and see the Maestà by Duccio, for example, or the Good Government by Ambrogio Lorenzetti, or the other works that initially created some of your expectations on Siena?
Almeno una parte delle sue aspettative nei confronti di Siena.
I think one of the reasons, because I was, I'm sure you do this too. I'm sure every writer does that. When you start writing something, you're asking yourself, why am I doing this? What is the reason for writing this particular thing? And one of the answers I had whilst I was working on Siena is on a month in Siena is that one of the reasons I was writing it is to better understand or better think about what occurred there, because on some level I doubted it, So for the 2 years from when I went and to when I sat down and wrote the book, every about 3 months or so, I would look at my diaries from that month, and I'd look at them because I wasn't quite sure that what I remembered happened really did happen. This kind of really, really magical meeting, between I felt between myself and the place and the works of art. So that reticence you describe is very true. I wanted to be available to it. I didn't want to be guided by my intentions. I am a little bit, both in writing and in living, suspicious would be putting it too strongly, but I'm not as trusting of my intentions as I think is commonly the case. I don't know if intention is on the side of living, if or on the side of writing. I want the writing to exceed my intentions, or I want my intentions to be informed by the writing, the other way around. And when I was in Siena, I didn't want my intentions to take me out of the moment that I was in. So I wanted to be guided by those moments. I met, for example, that lady who was waiting in the square to enter the ministry to get her papers done. I was going somewhere when I saw her, but I just wanted to be with that moment. So it's a desire to sort of surrender to the pace of the place and to understand the pace of the place, or let it inform my movements. What we are talking about, of course, can easily sound very abstract, but I don't mean it in that way. I mean it in the sense of, isn't it curious how, for example, with certain people, we might like them very much, we might even love them. We're not very eloquent with them. it's always hard to express ourselves. We stumble on exactly to find the right words. And with other people, we might love them just as much or like them just as much, or we might not even like them so much. And we find ourselves incredibly eloquent. That I think, in other words, part of our powers of expression are determined in some mysterious way on the sympathies that we perceive from someone else. Accurately or not, who knows? But uh, if I am confronted with someone that I know is hostile, I am less articulate than when I am with somebody who is sympathetic. That's why when I was very young, particularly when I was 11, 12, 13, I found those speeches by civil rights activists, whether they were African Americans in America or Black South Africans, or I found those speeches very moving, because to find that moment of eloquence and of expression in the face of a hostile audience is a very moving human event, I think. And so this is a long way to say that for whatever reason, still don't know what it is, Siena put me at ease. Siena uh, um, made me roam, literally roam, both physically as I was walking, but roam in my thinking. And so I wanted to surrender to that pace, to not let my time there dictated solely by my intentions the intentions that I came with.
Il suo essere
In
girovago
your experience in
all'interno,
Siena
all'interno della
and
città
in the reader's experience in the book,
mi sembra
it's almost as if you roam in the
viva
city in
in due
two different
dimensioni
ways.
diverse, immagino, nella sua esperienza diretta e necessariamente poi in quella che ha il
As in,
lettore
oftentimes
all'interno del libro. Nel senso che
you are
ci sono
immersed in the
diversi
city
momenti in
in
cui
solitude.
l'immersione nella città avviene
So
in
there's
solitario.
the writer who is lost in his thoughts and starts
Scrittore
following people
perso
in the
dietro ai suoi
city
pensieri
alleyways
che abbandona
until he ends
seguire
up
singole
in
persone
Piazza del
nei vicoli
Campo.
della città fino a sbucare
This happens
forse
on the first
nei
days
giorni
when
precedenti,
you were
quando
still with your
era ancora
wife.
insieme a sua moglie,
And Piazza del Campo
fino a
here is
sbucare in
described
Piazza del
as the
Campo
kernel of the
descritta come
city, let's say
il
the
verino
heart
della
of
città,
Siena
proprio
inside its
il
walls.
cuore pulsante della
So,
Siena arroccata fra le mura.
on the one hand,
Esplorazione
exploration in
solitaria e poi
solitude, and
momenti
then some
invece
other times you open yourself to
una
others.
ricerca però di
For
apertura
example,
all'incontro
you
con gli
talk
altri,
to a
il
woman from
dialogo
Nigeria.
con la signora
Outside the
nigeriana
walls,
di cui accennava
you
prima,
meet a man
l'incontro che
speaking
avviene
Arabic,
fuori dalle mura
and then,
con una persona
if I'm not
invece
wrong,
di lingua araba e poi
you even go
addirittura
to Adam's
una
house.
visita a casa di Adam, se ricordo
So
bene.
sometimes
Quindi
you explore on your
momenti
own,
di
some other times you
esplorazione
have a
solitaria,
dialogue with
momenti
others.
invece di immersione proprio nel dialogo con gli
And
altri.
then
Così
you
come
roam
il
both in
girovagare
the
attraverso la
maze of the
città
city alleyways
può muoversi sia
and outside the
nei
walls,
punti più labirintici di Siena, ma è
where
anche
you
un
go
uscire dalle
and
mura
see
e
the countryside,
avvicinare
which still
la
exists
campagna
outside
che esiste
Porta
anche
Romana,
nella
Porta
periferia di
Pispini,
Siena, fuori
and
da
the various
Porta
gates of the
Romana, da
city
Porta
walls.
Pispini, dalle varie porte che si aprono nelle mura di cinta della città. È
This, let's
interessante, molto
say, way of
interessante
proceeding is very
questo suo,
interesting because
definiamolo,
it is
metodo
impossible to
che rende
predict
anche
how
piuttosto
the story unfolds
imprevedibile
chapter
lo
by
sviluppo
chapter.
della vicenda, capitolo dopo capitolo, per cui si
So, for
passa da un
example,
momento
after looking at the
delicato
frescoes by Ambrogio
non
Lorenzetti,
so,
you discover a small cemetery outside the walls with just as much intensity and astonishment.
Altrettanta intensità, forse con altrettanto stupore, un piccolo cimitero.
In this small cemetery, you sit on a bench, start thinking,
seduto su una panchina,
and you write, and here I will quote from the book,
fra I pensieri che le si affacciano alla
"The
mente,
present
ce n'è uno
is the golden rim of a black cloth. How outrageous it is to be alive," I thought.
Come scandaloso essere vivi, pensavo.
My impression, which has also been strengthened by reading your other books, is that for you, it is essential to have a contact with the people in order to feel the city. And therefore, to you, it was necessary to have a dialogue with the people to feel fully accepted by Siena.
Accettato da Siena, per lei sia stato in un certo senso necessario anche passare attraverso questo.
Well, at least this is my own impression.
La mia impressione.
Can you confirm that?
Me la può confermare?
You've put your finger on a very, very important detail in not only in the structure of the book, but in the book's attitude, as I do think that books arrive with their attitudes. Very quickly as I was writing it, it became clear to me that one of the things that this book is thinking about is the nature of solitude. That very simple but incredibly mysterious thing that happens, that how our sense of the world is made slightly different when we're alone, and slightly even more different when we're alone somewhere we don't know, and so the questions of things being intimately closed or vastly opened, conversations with people or conversations with works of art, and the way that they alter and form our sense of the world and of ourselves in the quiet hours seems to me just such a fascinating detail of being a human being. And so the book ranges between those things, and ranges between them whilst being, I think, interested in the vulnerabilities of both states. The vulnerability of your solitude, how very easily it can be disrupted, and but also the vulnerability of moments of genuine contact, but also the robustness of them. The sort of their ability to genuinely author the moment. To genuinely author your sense of being. So yes, that's a very very astute observation.
Allora, ritornando alle...
Now let's go back to the works of art.
Una gran parte di quelle...
Most works mentioned in the book are works of Sacred Heart.
È costituita da opere d'arte sacra.
Some of them are among the most famous, even for us Italians, because we are used to finding them in the history of art books in school, such as, for example, the Maestà by Duccio.
Altre sono delle opere.
Other works are very important, but they are probably less known,
Al grande pubblico.
such as this one, for example.
Un attimo, l'immagine numero 2, che è la
This is the Madonna dei Francescani by Duccio di Buoninsegna, which is wonderful but very small.
di queste opere.
Now, I find particularly interesting the way you approach these works.
In cui lei le accosta.
For example, you write about the Madonna dei Francescani, and I quote, "The essential part of the power of the painting is that it is far more interested in human life than it is in God."
E poi
And then, in the following lines, you make a very subtle and careful description of the emotional attitudes of the characters. The friars at the Virgin's feet,
sotto Maria,
and above all, you describe the bond between the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, a bond made of timid looks, which you described in this very short sentence. They are seduced by one another's dominance.
E si tratta di annotazioni su.
These are remarks on characters belonging to a sacred iconography, which are also used to describe the Madonna col Bambino by Ambrogio Lorenzetti, which probably shift the attention from the fact that this is sacred art to a different way of reading it, forgetting the religious dimension that basically was the, let's say, raison d'être of these works.
Dato motivo di essere a queste opere. Da questo punto di vista.
Now, I can imagine that you don't have the Christian Catholic perspective that was the raison d'être of these works.
Come quella che ha ovviamente dato la prima ragione d'essere a queste opere.
So, my question is, has this helped you to have a different approach when looking at them?
A inquadrare un differente modo di approccio a queste opere rispetto a.
An approach which is different from the one that we have here unconsciously in Italy. Italy, which definitely is officially closer to Christianity.
Ad una cultura religiosa, ma che ufficialmente a questa dovrebbe essere, viene normalmente ritenuto.
So, to clarify the question.
La domanda che si era sfilacciata. Pensa che il suo essere.
Do you think that the fact of not belonging to a Christian Catholic culture has given you more freedom in interpreting these works of art?
Nella lettura di opere di questo tipo?
I'm not sure. I think it's an open question, and it's something that I think about in the book. In fact, there's about a page just after that section that you read from on that particular painting, where I asked the question, how would I look at this if I were Christian? How would I come at it? Would I like it just as much? Maybe I would like it, but like it for reasons that were beside the point. But I would then think it was the point, and so on. And so I try to unpack that, what that might be like. So it's impossible, of course, to imagine how I would approach it if I had grown up within the faith and the culture that this painting arises. If I was, having to look at these pictures as a schoolboy in a textbook. I don't know, maybe I would have been put off, maybe, I have no idea. But what I feel is I feel that, and I don't mean this to offend anybody who has a religious faith, but I am hugely fascinated by religion. I think religion is so interesting in general. And part of the reasons, I find it interesting for many reasons, but part of the reasons I find it interesting is that within it, there is a human drama about trying to find and think about our place in the world. Each faith comes with its own conclusions about that, but up to that point, I think one of the reasons I find religion interesting is that it's involved in something very similar to art. And I don't think it's an accident that religion and art have had a lot of conversations, right? Because it's thinking about our place in the universe. And so I approach religious art, and maybe this is wrong, who knows? But it's the way I do it. I approach religious art with a very scant knowledge of religion. I mean, I've read the Bible and I've read, I have some sense of the ecclesiastic codes in those paintings. But that's the least interesting thing about them. The most interesting thing about them is that there are paintings that are thinking about relationships. They're thinking about what does it mean to be a mother and a child, and that mother and that child, so they're doing both things. So I give myself license to approach religious text and religious paintings as part of the humanities, and I feel very passionate about this. I think it would be a great loss to the humanist project, of which I'm very passionate. Um, it would be a great loss to exclude the incredible inventiveness and creativity that has cloaked religious discourse and faith and thinking, you know. Um, and so those paintings, I think, don't need to be one thing or the other. I'm not saying they're not religious, and I'm not saying they are only humanist, but they are both, and they're probably more than that. There are probably other things too. Um, the other thing actually that I find interesting um about those paintings that we're speaking about, particularly the ones with religious. Of course, Sienese paintings aren't all religious, but they are. You're right, predominantly so. And that's partly because of the language then of taste, of what was permissible, of patronage, and so on. There are reasons why. I mean, obviously, these painters didn't always choose their subjects totally freely. I mean, sometimes they chose it for the market or they chose it for a patron. Nonetheless, what's interesting is that they are given a very, you could argue, by today's standards, where the artist is an individual and she can do whatever she wants and choose whatever she wants. In those times, you could argue that they had a very narrow repertoire. As a painter, you could do this or this or this, and this is your repertoire. And what I find interesting is how deep they went in that repertoire. It makes me think of this wonderful thing that the ancient Greeks thought about, that limits are places from which to travel. They're not necessarily places that constrain you. They can be, but they're also places from which you drive down deeper. And those artists seem to have done that with great inventiveness and power. So I see them as doing both. They're literally thinking about the mother and child, but they're also thinking about so many other things. And so I feel the paradox then is I feel that a painting like that, the one that you mentioned, was painted for me, even though I'm not of the faith. You know, it was painted for me too, as well as for someone who approaches it with great spiritual humility and emotion. You know, I think we are both allowed to engage with the painting in the way that we want, and I don't think in the final analysis you could say who's right and who's closer to it than.
Certo. Mr. Matar.
Certo.
Sure.
If you say so.
No, stavo pensando.
I was thinking about something which I didn't want to say, but now I will. As in, you wouldn't have been too bad as an art historian, because I find you quite focused in your descriptions.
Centrato mi permetto di scherzare, mi scusi.
Your descriptions actually are really very profound.
Che, no, sono realmente particolarmente profondi.
I have one last question. We talked a lot about contents. Now, let's talk about the container.
Parliamo un attimo di contenitore.
There are some funny pages because this book is not just profound, but also funny and smooth, which you dedicated to the museum guards of the Pinacoteca in Siena.
La Pinacoteca Nazionale di Siena, ai custodi del museo.
I know very well the experience of being in contact with these people. I studied in Siena some years ago, and I can perfectly recognize the atmosphere you describe. This is a very beautiful museum with very few people, and oftentimes there is only one visitor and maybe two museum guards on the side.
A fianco. Mi lasci leggere.
And to our audience, I would like to read some of your lines on this. And I quote, "Has it not always seemed that these figures and the cross-national divides in all the museums around the world share the same private grievance, as though they've been let down by the rest of us? They strike me as spiritual beings, guardians standing at the gate of some nebulous but significant transition. And maybe this has allowed them access into what, to the rest of us, remains veiled, a truth that concerns the violent nature of our distractedness." It is true, in some cases, visitors are distracted and cannot see, for example, a small painting by Sassetta because they are attracted by Lorenzetti or other major artists who are displayed in the room nearby. So, since we are coming to the end of our conversation, I would like to hear from you. What is your relation with museums? And it is clear from the book that you have a long-standing experience with museums. And what is your relation with the people living in them?
Li abita, i musei che tra l'altro lei non manca di...
And also, as you say in another passage of the book, museums are not entities that can be judged simply by the number of their visitors.
Well, first of all, about what you said about me possibly being passing for an art historian is extremely generous and I think sadly not true. uh, but I do think, and this is just a side point, I do think that we live, and I don't know if you would agree with me, but we live in a time, it seems to me, where we have such wonderful art historians and such wonderful curators that are, of course, it's stupid to generalize, but in a lot of the capitals of the world, there are just some just fantastic young curators who are intelligent but also really interested in bringing art closer to people, having more access to it. Sometimes, of course, in ways that aren't very elegant, but a lot of the times I think it's really a wonderful thing. And I don't think you can have a museum. Uh, I mean, you can have a city without a museum. You can have a country without a museum. To me, it's up there with you need a courthouse, a parliament, a museum, and a library and a hospital. Those are the things that you need just to start. Because, and this is why I am, notwithstanding my sympathies for the complexities involved in charging, in the need to charge entry, why I am a huge advocate for open and free access to museums. I can tell you, without a, 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 a shadow of exaggeration, that my life would be different if I didn't have free access to museums and to libraries, because I didn't have any money. If I had to pay £1 to enter the National Gallery, I would have maybe gone once a month when I was a young student. But because it was free, it wasn't a place that I went to with an objective. Because I think when you pay, you go in because you have an objective. I went in my lunch hour. I would take my sandwich and go in because it was warm. And I had somewhere I could sit. I would sit on a bench and look at a painting by Velázquez, knowing nothing about Velázquez. And I was reeled in, by the structure. Similarly with libraries, I often went to libraries because they were warm and because they were places where I could be comfortable. And I love to do this game that my father taught me, which is you close your eyes and you put your fingers on the spines of the books and you walk down and just randomly stop uh, and pick a book, and you promise to read that book. Doesn't matter what it's about, and it's a way to trick you out of the sometimes tyrannical power of our tastes, right? That stop us from moving into new territories. And that's something that museums do. They always tease us out of our tastes and implicate us when they're cleverly curated, implicate us into things that we didn't think that we were interested in. So the other reason why this is important is something that is very difficult to describe. No, it's not difficult to describe. It's difficult to prove, but I believe it totally. Which is that when you put a painting on a wall, that painting is working. It doesn't stop working. It's working every day. And everybody that stands in front of it and lends it their attention leaves something on that painting. So there's an accumulative quality of the gazes on that painting. And the painting uh, becomes very much part of our culture. So this question of museums and question of free access to museums is incredibly serious, because it's about to what extent do we take these things seriously? Oftentimes I think we pay lip service to them. We like culture, we like art, we like literature, but do we really understand the magnitude, the importance of these things? Do we understand to what extent our culture is dependent and reliant on a vibrant, lively engagement with them that isn't obstructed by how much you could pay, or obstructed by complicated language, or sense that this only belongs to a certain kind of people, you know? So I think it's incredibly important. It's both a delight. Art is always, I think, maybe this is a bit old-fashioned, but I think art should always, you know, delight, sometimes disturb too, but it's much more profounder than that. It's a fundamental aspect of our culture.
Grazie, Mr. Matar. Grazie per...
Grazie a te, thank you.
No, veramente grazie per l'attenzione.
No, really, thank you for the attention you gave us, and thank you for this very nice conversation, and for being so pleasant, which honestly makes us regret even more the fact that you're not here with us in Pordenone.
Cercare un rapporto mutatis mutandis, insomma, Pordenone non è...
Most definitely, our city cannot be, let's say, a space of anticipation like Siena, but hopefully, in the next future, you will be able to come here in person.
Realizzare questo incontro con lei della nostra città.
Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much. I hope the same. I very much look forward to meeting you in person and coming to your city. And I really was very much looking forward to the trip. I am sorry that my invitation ended in this way with the pandemic. I hope that next time I come to visit you, things will be much better. And I wish everybody well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you again, and thank you to all those who have followed us. And let me remind you of the title of the book, 1 Month in Siena by Hisham Matar, un punto di approdo in Italian. Thank you, everyone.